Welcome to this edition of the Scouting for Growth podcast, where we explore how corporations, startups, and investors can work together to shape the future of business. I'm your host, Sabine VanderLinden. Today, we are diving into a transformation that many leaders are only beginning to grasp. Search is no longer just about websites. It is about AI. For more than 2 decades, companies have invested heavily in search engine optimization. The rule was simple. Rank number 1 on Google and customers would find you. But that playbook is being rewritten. AI search engines are now summarizing answers, recommending brands, and in many cases, eliminating the need to click at all. In other words, the question is no longer, how do I rank, but rather, what does AI say about my company? This shift has profound implications for corporations and small businesses alike, especially in industries like finance, insurance, and other regulated sectors where trust, governance, and digital visibility are critical. To help us unpack this transformation, I am delighted to welcome Brad Wetherall. Brad spent more than a decade inside Google, leading operations across major platforms such as Google Business Profile, Google Shopping, Google Wallet, and Google Domains, shaping how millions of businesses are discovered online. Today, he is the Chief Operating Officer at Esquire Digital and the author of the best-selling book, AI and the Future of Search, which I actually delved into to understand how artificial intelligence is fundamentally changing the rules of digital discovery. In this conversation, we will explore what the rise of AI search means for organizations, big or small, how leaders can adapt their strategies today, and how this shift connects to a much bigger trend we are seeing emerge, the rise of the frontier firm, where intelligence is on tap, humans collaborate with AI agents, and every professional becomes an agent boss. So if you want to understand how AI will reshape visibility, trust, and competitive advantage in the digital economy, you are in the right place. Let's get started. Hi, Brad. Welcome to Scouting for Growth. So good to see you today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So let's go with some background, Brad. You spent more than a decade inside Google, working on products like Google Business Profile, Google Shopping, and Google Wallet. Incredible. Essentially shaping how over 100 million businesses are discovered online. Today, we are moving to new things, right? And you are helping organizations understand something more profound around what we see behind you. Tell us a little bit more about it.
Yeah, no. Well, it's been an interesting journey. Like to your point. I spent the last decade as the director of operations for a number of Google products. As you mentioned, the Google Business Profile, Google Shopping, specifically the Merchant Center product within Google Shopping. Google Wallet was my first Google product. And then even Google Domains until it was sold off to Squarespace. And it's, I left Google about a year and a half ago now. And it's really interesting to be on the other side of the curtain, right? And having a look at how businesses are experiencing the products, and sometimes they don't work as we originally intended, and I'm kind of experiencing that firsthand, which is a tad painful for someone who spent his career in operations trying to make things easier for people. But what I've found is that it's allowed me to give a little bit of visibility into the intended operation of various Google products. And I think that if the more you understand on how they were designed, it avoids the scenario of buying a Ferrari and then driving it backwards on the freeway, right? So if you drive it if you drive it forwards, you're going to go a lot faster. So I'm really hoping that my experience behind the scenes at Google can really now be the gain of a lot of business owners and small companies, small and large, to really help with leveraging these platforms the way that we're designed.
So when you look at the rise of AI-driven search engine, and I've been reading about those for quite a while, right? Being Gemini and then on ChatGPT, moving to Claude and Perplexity, all of them have different strengths, right? And a Google AI overview to ChatGPT, which is where I guess 80% of us still spend our time, even though we may be using the other one. What is one other shift which is happening right now that corporates, small businesses do not even realize are underestimated and they need to look at very closely right now?
Yeah, I think I talk a lot about this in the book too, specifically around how everything is being impacted by AI. Business owners are probably hearing the term AI, and it could mean 1,000 different things depending on the context in which it's being given. And I think that AI is impacting how brands are searched and how they're found. And I think that's kind of where like my book is really focused on how is the AI boom influencing and changing the landscape of how consumers are searching for products and services, and what do businesses need to know in order to make sure that they are showing up when people are searching for them. And that's been the biggest fundamental shift that I've seen across the search and maps experience in my decade plus time working in that industry, is really that this is a once in a generation shift. Just as the internet created this disruption in the late 90s, early 2000s, AI is having the equivalent of disruption in this space. And it's not just about the agentic capabilities and the capabilities of automation. It's also in how people are searching and how people are being found. And so, with now the top of search being an AI overview and not actually being the traditional 10 blue links that originally put Google on the map in terms of, no pun intended, like for kind of like being actually the forefront of search, AI is now actually the top of the page. That's the thing that is going to be more important than, being in those 10 blue links. And, for the companies that see that shift and can make that transition the fastest, the more successful they will be in the long run, because then they won't have to play catch up. And so that race to kind of see who's going to be able to adopt the new techniques to be relevant in AI and be a brand that is associated with a particular type of industry, they're the ones that are going to end up having a real longer term success than others. So it's a critical shift, and unfortunately, there is no easy path for this. There's no easy button. You can't just like buy backlinks. There's a number of different initiatives that go into the sophistication of what AI is looking for. And, so like, a big part of my book is really trying to demystify like what those elements are, so that you can have a little bit of a blueprint into how you have to act differently in order to be visible in the new world of search.
So let's unpack this, right? We have now 2 decades where businesses played the SEO game. So, we would, as you said, to be one of the top 5 links on Google, we would actually pay for it, right? We'll pay for keyword to rank number 1. Now we are moving to the world of generative search engine optimization. Some people call it GEO, others call it AEO. But that world is a 0-click world where AI summarization are at the top of the web page when we go on different platforms. So different ways of finding the information, but we are not clicking anymore. And that requires a new blueprint, which we are going to talk about a little bit later. But one key thing is, therefore, the way we appear has completely changed. And myself, when I actually look at my ranking on whether I'm going to Google, Bing, or whether I actually type on a search engine like ChatGPT, I would say that I rank or I appear for different reasons. It's about the thought leadership. It's about the articles I write, between the consistency of the different angle I am talking about for the topic that I want to be renowned for. So how fundamental does AI change the economist technique of search and digital visibility, because recently I was on stage with a very, very renowned player in the market, Stripe, and we were talking about agentic commerce. And when we were doing our research, we identified three things that in our industry, finance organization need to pay attention to. And I'm going to use my language. First is discoverability. Everything needs to be machine readable, markdown JSON. Two, quotability in insurance. How do I get to have a price, for people to have transparency around what I have to offer quickly. So that goes into API ready platform. And three for us is bindability. How can I actually buy the product? And now it needs to be in microsecond. In my industry, insurance, that used to take maybe 3 minutes in some cases, but needs microsecond, meaning that to avoid adverse selection, we need to make sure we are clear on our ICP, our client, and actually being able to offer that product based on good data to actually make sure we acquire the good customers. So I told you what is happening in my world. Tell us what is happening in your world of AI search for small businesses and big one, and what are the economics those organizations needs to look at?
Yeah. I mean, like the recipe that you just displayed was, or just detailed, was really accurate, I think. And I think that I'm going to expand on that because like starting with the zero-click search phenomenon, right? So this is where like the landscape of what businesses get shown in the AI overview is diminishing, right? So there's not as many businesses that are going to be shown. And if a consumer is doing a informational intent query, right? So they're seeking information, then what AI's job is to go out and get an answer to that question. And so, you mentioned a couple of things there. You mentioned about, having a website that is not just built for humans, but it's also built for machines with the structured data, right? So that it needs to be designed. There's a technical component to this where you need to make sure that the information that you are publishing is able to be crawled by these AI bots very easily and cheaply in terms of the amount of words that they need to get through, so that they can ingest that information and use it at the appropriate time when someone searches for a question that you happen to have the answer to. Content optimization is another part of that. So it's actually providing the answer to the question that is being asked. And I think this is really where Google talks a lot about this EEAT acronym, which is a recipe for what they're looking for in the information that it's providing, and the acronym is expertise, experience, authority, and trust, right? Trustworthiness. And so like when you're writing content, you want to be able to produce content that people are looking for, that people will need to look for answers. And in recent Google search algorithm updates, there was one just a couple of weeks ago where they're really kind of like doubling down on net new information. Like, so if you're taking information from other websites, regurgitating it, rewriting it, potentially using AI to rewrite it, and then slap it on a web page, Google will say, hey, you're not contributing to the conversation any. It's the same information that I'm getting from these 10 other sources. So it's not net positive contribution to the topic, and it's not gonna cite you. It's not gonna pick you up. So you have to have something unique to say. And this is where, it's kind of funny, right? We talk about AI replacing humans, but like this is the part that like AI is seeking human input, right? Originality and, a particular perspective on a topic. That's what's actually going to be a secret sauce for getting you visible in these AI overviews, is that, if you have a unique perspective and you have some type of human perspective, that makes your content original, makes it fresh, and it makes it desirable. So it's not just about having the technology so that you're making it easy for the algorithms to read. It's also about having something unique, a unique perspective to bring to the conversation. So when you're writing content, blog posts, whatever it may be, it's about that perspective. And then the third part, really kind of coming back to the EEAT algorithm, is who are you, right? Like, and like AI wants to know, they want to attribute authoritativeness and trust to you as a company or you as an individual. And so it's not just important to write unique content and slap it on a web page. It's also about making sure that you're talking about who the perspective is coming from. You're talking about your experience and like why that information matters. I could write, there could be an article out there about the 5 things that you need to do to optimize your Google business profile. And it could be written by my nephew, doesn't really know anything about it, or it could be written by the former director of operations for the Google business profile. And so that authority, who is writing the content is actually more meaningful now and matters more now than it ever has. So little tweaks to your content strategy become really important, like making sure that when you write a blog, or you have a blog written and you post it to your website, that you make sure that you put an author, you attribute that perspective to someone, because you're actually developing that entity that AI is going to pay attention to. And it's going to say, oh, I know Brad. He was that bloke that worked at Google for all those years. And so his word is more authoritative than maybe someone else's. And if you don't have that authority, that strategy is also a way to develop that authority, because the more you do that, the more you build a reputation for having a net positive contribution to a given topic. And you're training AI to say, oh, like when Sabine wrote this article, I need to pay attention because, I've read her prior articles and she is a net positive contributor to that particular piece of information that AI is really trying to develop. And so, as much as people get worried that AI are going to replace humans, this is one aspect where humans are not going to go out of style, right? Like a unique perspective cannot be generated by AI, definitively. And so it's just kind of interesting, that's one of the secret things that to kind of make sure that you're investing in contributing to new information on a particular topic. That's going to be very critical.
Your statement around will AI replace human, I think that is a podcast on its own, as we know. But actually what you also are saying is we need to educate ourselves to really understand what is happening with artificial intelligence and how we can differentiate within that world. And when we met last, you mentioned something striking. I remember during our conversation that you highlighted that between 2023 and 2024, the size of the internet exploded due to AI-generated content. So what does that mean for a Google algorithm? What, do we need to be mindful of when, we are losing traffic? You just mentioned some of us, we are not applying the right EAT metric.
Exactly. Yeah. And you've got a great memory, like from between Q1 of 2023 and Q1 of 2024, the size of AI-generated content on the internet grew 2,800%. Right? Like just massive explosion, right? And if you recognize those dates, it's not entirely surprising, because that's where it has never really been easier to create new content. You just go to ChatGPT, ask it to write a 1,000-word essay on a given topic, and bang, you've just got new content. Now, when Google observes this behavior and they see this massive influx in new content coming onto the internet, they're gonna react, and they did in Q2 of 2024. They promoted the fact that they de-indexed all of this, what they considered at the time to be AI-generated spam, right? So it's like, if you go to an AI agent, you ask it to write 1,000 words on a particular topic, chances are a whole bunch of other people did the same thing. And that means you've got a lot of duplicate content on the internet. So Google just said, enough, we're going to de-index it all. So like a lot of businesses during that period of time saw a massive drop in traffic from their website, right? Because they were leveraging this loophole of like generating content to be found. And then Google changed the game. They moved the goalposts, which is it's become a trend with Google, right? Like they're kind of like they constantly change the game. And so it's forced businesses to adapt, because now it's not just write content, get clicks. It's coming back to the EEAT algorithm. It's about authoritative content. I've told people that statistic before, and a common question I get is, all right, got it, AI content is bad. And no, that's not actually not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that AI content is bad. I'm saying unoriginal content is bad. You can generate AI content, but you have to have a unique perspective, right? You have to kind of like make it yours, give it your brand, give it your voice. If your brand has humor, inject some humor. That makes better content. It's about creating content that people want to read, and it's becoming a lot more of an art. It's there's not just the science of it anymore. It's this balance of art and science, and that's really where, as someone who's now in the digital marketing space. I kind of joke with a lot of my colleagues. It's like, you kind of have to love this industry to be in it, because why would you choose such a difficult industry to work in? It's constantly changing. Google's changing the rules. I love geeking out on that stuff. And I watch to see when Google changes the algorithm. It's like, oh, what did they change and why did they change it? But you kind of have to be into it to be in this industry. And it's fascinating to see. And it also allows blokes like me to be able to stay in front of what's coming. In fact, last year in May, we're coming up to the next Google I/O, by the way. But at last year's Google I/O, it's their developer conference. Elizabeth Reed was actually on stage at I/O last year. And I worked with Liz. She actually used to be the VP of Maps, and I worked in the Maps team. So I worked with Liz direct. She is now the VP of Search. And she was up on stage and she was talking about, in her words, it was like the future of search. And she talked about how Google is shifting the search engine to an answer engine, right? And like this is real. And she demoed at the time, it was new, it was the AI mode capabilities. And what was really interesting about how she talked about AI mode was that is really Google's playground for AI experimentation, right? They're really trying to figure out how consumers are going to use new AI technology, right? And if they were to try and take the learnings from ChatGPT and put it into a Google shell, AI mode was their first attempt at doing, at replacing the search experience. And so she even said on stage last year that, like, as they trial new technology and new things, they're going to slowly move that technology into the core search experience, which would be the default search that you see when you go to google.com. So it's just, I'm excited to see what they talk about in the upcoming Google I/O in May. And because, a lot has changed in that 12-month period. And I think it's going to be a lot of good insights to be able to unpack what they've learned in that period of time and where they might be heading. I joke about this book. I released it only a couple months ago. I might have to write a second edition in a couple months because it's changing so fast. But don't let that stop you from going out and buying it, because it's still relevant right now.
Absolutely. And it's interesting you're saying you're geeking out on digital marketing. I geek out on social media because it's part of my proposition. And it's all about the numbers, right? It's all about the math behind it. And so when I think about what you just said about Google, I hear that number one on Google is no longer number one. So what does that mean in practice?
Yeah, I love it, because I think that it comes back to Google used to being this search engine that was built on this philosophy of hyperlinks, right? And so the AI world doesn't use hyperlinks. It uses this concept of a neural network. And so the idea is about clustering nodes of information, right? It's kind of like this knowledge graph philosophy, which is, all right, Google needs to create knowledge about certain, elements, nodes of information. So like, when I talk to my businesses, I support a lot of law firms. When I talk about law firms, I'm like, it's about the who, the what, and the where. Who are you? It could be, Brad Wetherall and Associates, like the brand that you're building. What are you? Oh, you're a criminal defense attorney. Where are you? Oh, I'm in Orange County, California, right? So those are, in Google's eyes, those are three separate nodes. And what we're trying to do, in the old school way of doing SEO, you'll just be like, all right, just get links and link it together, because a link was a proxy for like a vote. And the more votes you get, the higher up on Google you become. And so number one is to be the highest in organic search. But now, if you look at the structure of Google search page, you've got the AI overview, you've got ads, you've got the local pack maybe, you've got other people searched, and then you've got the organic results. And so like you have to scroll down all the way through all of that stuff in order to get to number one. So like number one's not number one anymore, right? Number one is all the way down the page. So the new number one is being in the AI overview. That's the top of the page. That's Google's new promotion to promoted information. And so if the old school way of doing SEO, it still works, but it just works for the organic information, which is below the fold. It's the old number one. The new number one is using this neural network. So it's about, okay, can we optimize Brad Wetherall and Associates, who is a criminal defense attorney in Orange County, California? And if we can start associating those terms and start replicating that, it's actually a good strategy for when you're naming your Google business profile, right? Like, and you kind of like use the who, the what, and the where in the name of your profile, because you really want to try and train AI to use those three things together so that when you take the brand away, when you take away Brad Wetherall and Associates and you do a search for criminal defense attorney in Orange County, AI is like, oh, I know Brad Wetherall's a criminal defense attorney in Orange County, because they keep seeing these nodes come closer together in the neural network. And so that's really about the science behind how the AI is lumping these clusters together. And the closer you can bring these nodes together and the closer you can train and influence AI to kind of like say, all right, I'm going to associate these keywords, the more likely you are that your topic is going to show up. And, you know, we at Esquire Digital have used that technology and that philosophy quite successfully for even more specific user journeys, right? So like if you're an attorney that focuses on defending DUIs, right, or DWIs, whatever they're called in whatever country you live in, then it's like we can associate that topic to that law firm, to that location, and we've been very successful at getting our lawyers into the AI overview using that philosophy. So we know it works. It's interesting that what used to be the number one technique isn't going to fly, or at least it's not number one anymore in terms of what's showing up on the top of the page.
So you already have mentioned the book, AI and the Future of Search. And in that book, you explain the real battle is about influencing what AI says about your brand. So very important. And we already have touched upon a great framework, call it EAT for those listening. So it's EEAT. And we have dove into what that means as part of your AI generated answers. But another angle I would like you to look into, Brad, is the fact that, my industry, regulated industry, insurance bank corporates, that operate and work with customers, how would you say that the technique works when you think about governance, trust, and transparency, probably when you start using those AI systems?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that this is where, if I was to explain it in the context of EEAT, then it's really about like authoritativeness, right? So it's like, so why should I listen to you when it comes to that information, right? And I think that a lot of people that are in these highly regulated industries, even AI, they're going to be looking for authoritative information. So like, for example, like when you do Google searches on kind of more sensitive topics, Google is the LLM that I have the most familiarity with. And so like they kind of learn the hard way that, there's a lot of fake information out on the internet, right? And so they really needed to narrow down the pool of information by which to train their AI data on. And so the way that they do that is by condensing the information to a set of authoritative pieces of information. So like, it wants to pull information from the New York Times, a lot of authoritative news outlets. They're not going to pull a lot of news and factual information from Reddit, right? Because there's a lot of opinions from that. So even though Reddit serves as a really good perspective on the pulse of the community, right? A community opinion on things, it's not going to be heavily used as authoritative piece of information on informational intent queries. And so Google, as well as a lot of these other LLMs, are going to be refining and using trust scores and trust algorithms on particular pieces of information to know, am I comfortable and am I going to get in trouble by quoting information on a website that turns out to be fake news or inaccurate data? And so it behooves you to kind of promote your authority, right? To kind of like tell people why you can be trusted and that the information that you're providing is authoritative. That not only will help your brand in the eyes of the consumers, but it also helps you in the eyes of AI, because it will elevate the level of trust, and it's more likely that they're going to include you in that source for information. So there's a great opportunity for industries that are in those highly regulated industries, because the pool of data gets condensed the more regulated and the more risky it is for Google to start quoting. And so, it just means that the investment required to become an authority is more, you're going to get more bang for your buck if you're working in those regulated industries. And so these strategies that I'm talking about can be a lot more meaningful for you because Google is going to not include potentially some of your competitors if they haven't established that appropriate level of trust. It also could be perceived as a race, right? Like you want to become the authority before your competition does, right? So it's a scenario of like you don't really want to get left behind. So it's kind of a good and a bad scenario here, right? Because it's like you kind of have to do it, and it's a great opportunity, but you have to make the time to be able to invest in what your brand is. And another part of what we do at Esquire Digital that I talk about in the book is public relations as an investment, right? Because that's another really powerful way to springboard authority, right? Because it's one thing to write content and to tell people about yourself, but it's better to have other people tell information about you, right? If other people vouch for you, then it elevates your level of trustworthiness. And that's where reputation signals come in. And that's where public relations comes in. And so we've been very effective at getting our brands into certain news outlets that already have that level of authority. And the more that we do that, the more we build up the trust in the brand. So there's a couple of techniques in order to help you springboard your level of authority and your level of trust. But for those regulated industries, that's maybe more of an area of investment that might be more critical than it might be for some other industries.
Yeah, authority, credibility, right? Authority, credibility. I was like going to say visibility as well. Words that you have mentioned a few times. So if we want to bring that down to execution, right? Everybody wants to understand, how do I get started? If you're advising a CEO, an innovation leader, what are the maybe 4 to 5 practical moves they should make immediately, right? To future-proof their visibility, their trust, their authority on AI search environments.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think that I'm probably going to annoy a lot of people with my answer because there's not really an easy way to do this, right? Because I think that the 5 things that I would have you focus on would be your website, right? Like, and I think this is like the design of your website. So it's you used to think that like having a website is table stakes. Everyone has a website, but it has to be designed both for humans and for AI. We talked about this a little bit earlier about how you need to be writing content for both humans and machines. So having a really optimized website for AI data is critical. Content is the next part of that. So like, once you've got a beautiful looking website with multimedia content, because at least Google has this internal model. We codenamed it MUM, Multimodal Unified Model is the acronym. And it's a fancy name for Google can watch all the videos and look at all the imagery and it knows exactly what you're doing. So like multimedia content on your website is actually much more powerful now than just words alone. So having multimedia content on your website, but then the words also matter, right? Because it's a bit like we talked about this earlier about having a unique perspective, right? So that's kind of where having content strategy is a big part of that. Having a powerful Google business profile. Google business profile is Google's secret sauce when it comes to local intent queries. If you ever wanted to look up a local business on ChatGPT, you probably noticed that it's terrible, right? And the reason why it's terrible is because it doesn't have the database that Google does on all the business data. It was working with Bing to actually grab Bing data. I started noticing that they're actually crawling GBP data to actually pull in Google data. I don't know if that's intentional or above board or not. They might get in trouble for doing that. But Google has this information. They're sitting on a landmine of knowledge, of business knowledge. And that is a tremendous competitive advantage. I think that, a lot of people have been asking me, given my experience on GBP, if we think that the Google business profile is going to go away as a product. And, it's an interesting answer because I think the product is going to change, But the value to Google is not the way the product looks. The value to Google is the data. The data is the value. And so that's not something that they're ever going to mess with, because they need a constant flow of legitimate business data. And so that's why investing in your Google business profile, it's a straightforward way for you to tell Google exactly what you want them to know about you. You're inserting information into the Google databases when you contribute to your Google business profile. So that's like a really powerful attribute. So that would be number 3. Number 4 would be reputation. Part of that is investing in getting reviews on, on Google Business Profile reviews is a really strong way to do that, because again, you're injecting that third-party feedback directly into Google's databases, and they're training its data off of review data. But it's not limited to GBP. Like Yelp reviews, Facebook reviews, like all this different kind of like reputation management is a really powerful signal for AI. And then the 5th one would be, I think, public relations. And I mentioned this earlier, which is, kind of like continuing the thread of third-party verification and validation of your data. If you can have a PR strategy, getting your brand in the media, we've been very effective at commissioning research studies and then publishing those research studies behind the brand of the organization. Then they become an authority on that piece of research. And that is tremendously powerful in, we can pick up PR on that, especially when you develop infographics. Infographics are really hot right now. So if you create an infographic, a lot of these news outlets and other publications will post your infographic on their site. And that's like another way of getting more visibility. So if you do those 5 things, right, like your website, your content, your GBP, reputation management, and public relations, then you're pretty much covering your bases. Now, the reason why I started this by saying you're probably going to be a little bit angry at me is that that's hard, right? That's a lot of stuff that you got to do. But unfortunately, that's where, it's becoming more and more sophisticated. And the companies that do this well and have a strategy for each of those 5 pillars, they're the ones that are going to win the race. And so it's about kind of figuring out where you have a strength as an organization and where you perhaps could have an investment, right? Like maybe you're doing great on your website and your content and your GBPs, but maybe you're not doing great on reputation and PR. So if you can identify from your own perspective where your gap is, I think you're going to probably get the biggest ROI by investing in the thing that needs the most investment.
So when you look at my thesis for this year, Brad, this season of Scouting for Growth, I am exploring what we call the frontier firm or the agentic enterprise, which are organizations which deliver intelligence on tap, where human and agent collaborate with one another, and every one of us become an agent boss or an agent management. So how do you see AI search fitting into that?
Yeah, I mean, it's, we've talked a lot of the overlap of AI and humans. And I think that just elaborating a little bit on how in the world of AI search, I don't see this as a place where AI will replace humans. I think that, in fact, to the contrary, the AI is looking for human perspective, right? Like, and it's trying to ignore stuff that it created, and it's really trying to bring in unique points of view and unique information. I've even seen people go so far as to intentionally put typos in the content that they go onto their website, like misspellings and things. It has been working transparently, right? Like to kind of trick the algorithm into be like, oh, well, that can't be AI because it's got a typo in it, right? And it's tricking AI to increase the trust level that it's unique and that it's being written by a human. It's an interesting balance, and I think that time will tell on kind of like how that actually ebbs and flows. I think that we saw Google de-index a whole bunch of pages on the websites that over-indexed on AI. We know that authoritativeness is a big influencing factor, and I think that like as helpful as AI is, these types of interactions as well, like human interactions, like a podcast, or conversations that are people, even if that podcast is getting transcribed, and then AI will read the transcription, but it has more authority because a human said it, right? And so I think that there's little things like this, little strategic things that we could be doing to kind of like edge AI to work to our favor. If you're not careful and if you're a little bit lazy, you can just have AI do all the heavy lifting. And that's not going to work in the long run because, like all these LLMs are getting too smart, and they know when it's written by a human and when it's not. It's not really about tricking the system. It's about doing the work, right? And I think that's kind of where the future of the human investment is going to be. You have to do the work. You have to have the perspective. Use AI as a tool, but like it won't replace your original thought, right? Like, and that's kind of where I would double down on that. I would double down on kind of like the original thought and broadcasting that your personal message.
Yeah, I mean, you are going back to that balance, right, between the human and the agent. Some of the work can be done like the research, but still having our tone of voice, our style, applying examples. I've heard also about the typo, which have become popular in recent months. It's interesting. But what you are saying, we are talking about agent bosses, right? Some of the tasks we do may be done by machine, some may be hybrid, human, and then some will be agent boss. So the human is leading. And in this era where, we as human will be orchestrating AI agent to perform work, analyze information, make decision, how will this change our customer search, evaluate brands, and make purchase decisions?
Oh my goodness. It's I can speculate. There's a hypothesis, right? I think that people are going to have so much more information, access to information, right? They're going to get a lot of information very quickly. We're getting to a point too where hallucinations in AI data is coming down. Depending on the type of hallucination. So, like what I've experienced and in the research that I've done is that in kind of like general everyday use of AI, the probability of a hallucination is really low. It's about 1 to 1.5%. But as you get more and more specific and you go into kind of like deep research tasks, the probability of hallucination gets higher, gets larger. Or to the point where some very specific deep research tasks even had a hallucination rate at about 30%. Right, which is like that's pretty dangerous, like when you start thinking about how AI is going to give you information very quickly, it then becomes like, well, what is the trustworthiness of that information? And so, like for the consumer experience, there's the basic types of queries, like simple, non-controversial type stuff. The probability of a hallucination is really low. And so in those user journeys, I think that it's going to become very, very custom and very popular for consumers to use that information. And we're already seeing the zero-click search phenomenon where, and this is actually true to what Elizabeth Reed said at Google I/O last year, which is Google is shifting from being a search engine to being an answer engine, right? So last time I saw the statistic, it was as high as 60% of Google searches now results in 0 clicks, right? Because the AI overview is rendering, people are getting the information that they need, and they're bouncing. So that's terrible for marketers who are really trying to push, because the value of a website visit is almost like a currency of a marketer. So nowadays it's what I'm trying to do with a lot of my clients is saying like, clicks was a flawed metric to begin with. Like what we really want to track is customers. How many customers are you getting? And you may get half the amount of clicks to your website, but if you're getting the same or more customers, then that's great because now it's more authoritative and it's more qualified leads that is coming to your website. So it's changing the industry, right? Like, I mean, the way that we talk about value, it's like, oh, I got 10,000 clicks last month and I got 5,000 clicks this month. So something must be wrong. But I'm like, well, but how many customers did you get? And I'm like, oh, well, I actually got 5% more customers. I'm like, well, then nothing's wrong. Yeah, that's good. It's just the metric and our unit of measurement and our definition of success has to evolve. And so, now that is not always the case. Sometimes the traffic decreases and business decreases with it, right? And so that's where, you really need to buy my book transparently. You need to find out, what do I need to do differently? If you find yourself in that situation where your traffic is decreasing and your client base is decreasing, then you're not visible in AI. My crystal ball is that trend is going to continue, right? And it's going to get worse. And worse meaning, if I was to predict what Google was going to do, and that's a little bit of a strange thing to say, because I don't even think Google knows what they're going to do, because like Google is experimenting all the time. And so they will try new things, and if it doesn't work, they abandon it and they try something else. So like, if anyone is telling you this is what Google is going to do, be very cautious of that, because Google themselves don't know what they're going to do. But if you wanted to get a preview, go play with AI mode, right? Because that's the sandbox that Google is playing in. That's where it's trying all of these new capabilities. And so that's going to be, look at that, and that's your current state of your crystal ball, is like, what experience is in there. And then you can kind of get an idea. Like in the local search world, we've been seeing that the local pack, like the 3-pack with local businesses with the map, that is not displaying in a lot of categories in a lot of locations now. There is now an AI version of the local pack, right, that is showing up inside AI overview. And it's a completely different algorithm. The results are different. So now it's like, all right, oh my gosh, how am I going to now learn the influencing factors of the because again, Google's moved the goalposts on us, right? It's like they've changed. And so we now have to adapt. And I think that because when I worked in the Google Business Profile product, we didn't consider ourselves to be a product. We consider us to be a platform, like a data repository, which is actually why when you look at the Google Maps experience, or like the Google Business Profile on search on desktop, on search on mobile, on maps on desktop, and on maps on mobile, they all look different, right? Like it's not a consistent experience. And that's because the GBP product was a platform, and each of those teams were all done by different engineering groups. They were all built independently, because Google didn't, like, at least the GBP team didn't consider their product to be a product. They considered it to be a platform. And so like, when you think about it in the context of data, then that data is going to feed AI, and that data is going to show up in new and interesting ways. And so the form factor of the product is going to change, but Google's dependence and interest and investment in maintaining the data is not going to go anywhere. So like, that's a big part of what fuels my marketing approach, is that all of these things, those 5 things that I told you to do, that's got legs. It's going to have longevity. It's not going to be throwaway work, because all of that investment is feeding the information, and the display of that information may change, but the value of that information will not go away. So it's not going to be a waste of time to invest in those initiatives. And that's probably where, even though my crystal ball may be a little hazy right now, I have a lot of confidence in the activities that I'm doing to try and make sure that the data is where it needs to be.
One thing you highlighted, I think everyone needs to remember, is outcome is the name of the game now, right? We have to apply this, Amazon well-known practice, which is to start backward. I think we are in the world of starting backward, thinking about the outcome to achieve that outcome. But one thing you highlighted as well, Brad, is we are in this world of AI agents, and they are going to become the intermediaries of trust for a lot of brands, for a lot of customers. So what does it mean for the marketeer, the digital strategist, the brand authority out there? The other crystal ball question I had for you, and my last.
Yeah, I mean, I've been using agents to do a lot of like research. So as an example, it's really helpful to do competitive analysis through agents and agentic technology, right? To be, to go out and say, who are your biggest competitors? What content do they have on their website? Or even in content that you're creating for your own website, like to have the agent go out, do a bunch of queries, and then tell me, is there anything unique about the content that I just wrote, right? Because I just talked at length about the importance of having unique content. right? A lot of these agents can go do the heavy lifting for you, and the agents can, you can develop a skill in Claude, right? Like, so, like Claude Code and Cowork, like some of my favorite things to play around with these days. I've been doing a lot of vibe coding, like I'm, geeking out on that stuff as well. Even if you're not as into it as I am, and you're not like kind of like doing the research, I think that it's the way that I'm using it is to kind of like source the knowledge, right? So like it's kind of like if you kind of build something but you haven't really spent the time doing the right design, you can go really, really fast in the wrong direction, right? And then by the time you get there, and all of these agents has empowered you to get to the destination very quickly, but it just might not be where you want to go, right? And so, when I'm talking to my boss and my business partner about building processes and products and whatnot, I'm really doubling down on the requirements. Like, what do we want? What are the requirements? Because the agents that we've got doing all the work can do things very quickly, and very, in a high degree of quality. But like, if you don't have the right requirements, if you haven't defined what you want, you're not going to get what you want, right? And so I think that's taking the time to just think about the requirements and what you're looking for and the problem that you're really trying to solve. That's really the secret sauce for kind of like moving into this agentic world, because like the capabilities to set these agents on a path is actually, it's pretty easy. Like it's never really been that easier now, because a lot of these tools are at your fingertips. But in the same philosophy of like trying to make sure that you're injecting your human perspective, the same goes for agentic behavior, right? Like really kind of make sure that you're working the agent and the agent isn't working you.
Yeah, very well said. Very well said. So thank you very much for joining me today, Brad. I mean, when you look at what you do every day, what would be the most successful frontier firm? What are they going to understand about AI search that everyone else missed?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much. So you really need to start now, right? The people that are going to really capitalize on the AI shift, the people that get in early. If you start building your brand and your like that EEAT algorithm, right? If you start building your expertise, you start building your authority and your trustworthiness, then you will be, that's the one thing that you should be doing now, right? And I think that if your competitors are doing it now, then you need to catch up. You're losing ground every day that goes by, right? You need to play catch up. And I think that if you were to look 5 years from now, one of the things that I think that you would say is, I wish I got an earlier start on that investment, right? Because it's, the early bird's going to get the worm here, right? And I think that that's kind of where, you don't want to be left behind. You really want to kind of make sure that you're leading the charge in your industry and becoming you're becoming the leader in that space. So that would be my advice to you. Get moving. I don't think it's going to be throwaway work. Now, as far as me, like, I'd love to have you pick up a copy of the book, AI in the Future of Search. You can find that on Amazon. We actually reached #1 bestseller a couple of weeks ago, which is great in the SEO industry. So yeah, so very, very proud of that. You can also pick it up in the US at Barnes and Noble. It's on barnesandnoble.com. And then I'll be doing some various speaking engagements around the country as well. A number of SEO conferences, local U conferences, Brighton SEO, some of these larger events. And of course, please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm always interested in talking to business owners and help guiding them, answering questions, or maybe you've got an interesting story that might be a unique corner case. I geek out on that stuff, and I would love to talk to you about those scenarios and perhaps even guide you through some of those challenging experiences. So LinkedIn, Amazon, and I hope to see you around. Don't be shy.
Well, no one should be shy. It's a very important topic. Don't leave that behind, right? You look at it from an outcome base, but it is how your business is going to be found. Brad, thank you so much for joining me today. This was a fascinating conversation, wasn't it? What I find particularly powerful in what Brad shared with us today is that we are not simply witnessing another shift in digital marketing. We are seeing a structural transformation in how knowledge is surfaced, trusted, and acted upon. For decades, businesses optimize for search engines, right? You would actually pay for your keywords on Google and you would expect to be on page one. Today, they must learn to inform and influence AI systems that increasingly act as the first and sometimes the only interface between organizations and their customers. And this is where the idea of the frontier firm becomes so relevant for us all. We are entering an era where intelligence is on tap, where humans collaborate with digital agents, and where leaders, whether inside large corporations or small businesses, must become what I like to call agent bosses, orchestrating AI capabilities to make smarter, faster decisions. As Brad reminded us today, the organizations that will thrive are not those chasing yesterday's SEO tactics, but those learning how to build authority, trust, and visibility in an AI-mediated world. Brad, thank you for sharing your insights and for helping us decode what this next chapter or frontier of search and discovery will look like. And to our listeners, if this conversation sparked new ideas about how AI is reshaping the competitive landscape, I encourage you to explore Brad's book, AI and the Future of Search, where he dives deeply into the strategies organizations can use to stay visible and relevant in the age of AI. As shared earlier, I dove into the book's best practice and key frameworks, and I was pleased to see that I already embedded many of those best practices in the work I do every day at Alchemy Crew Ventures alongside our partners. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to Scouting for Growth, share it with a colleague, and join us next time as we continue to explore how innovators, corporates, and investors can work together to shape the future of business. Until next time, keep scouting for growth.